welcome to On Point. I'm Mike Tersigni. Today I would like to focus our attention to the deteriorating budget in the state of California. If I'm not mistaken, most people know that the state is currently in a budget crisis, but not too many of them know why. So today we will be looking at the current state of the budget and how some state laws have significant impacts. My first guest is Tom Hoganesh, a political science professor at Cal State Northridge since 2002, who specializes in state and local politics. And my next guest is Bruce Ackerman, the president and CEO of the Valley Economic Alliance. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. And first, I'd like to start with Bruce. Could you please tell us what the Valley Economic Alliance does?
I'd love to, Mike. We're a nonprofit economic development and marketing collaborative that was created after the 1994 Northridge earthquake. Or actually, it's an interesting history. The organization was created because of the Northridge earthquake. Several of the community leaders in the Valley got together and said, how do you recover from an earthquake? You know, what do we do? Where do we go? Where do we turn to? And so they created the organization in direct response to that. And our charge at the time was twofold. One was the economic development side of it, and that was to do whatever we could to help rebuild the business community. Estimates that we looked at today show that anywhere from 20 to 30,000 people were out of work the day of the earthquake because there were no jobs to go to. I mean, the businesses literally were leveled. So our primary task was to get that rebuilding process underway, make sure that the federal earthquake relief monies got to the earthquake site, got into the Northridge area, and made sure that we did everything humanly possible to get businesses reopening and rehiring those jobs that were lost. The second reason that we were created was to actually take on the task of telling the story about the San Fernando Valley, marketing the Valley, if you will, telling the true story of what we're all about. At the time, in 1995, we were a region of about 1,600,000 people, close to 60,000 businesses. You know, that's a huge economic engine, but nobody realized we were that big of a region because the majority of the territory is covered by the city of Los Angeles. And it was one of the more difficult tasks that we undertook. We did a lot of work with Tom and with CSUN and with a lot of the departments at the university in pulling together the data to tell the story about that region. So as an organization, we sit today, we're not still trying to recover from the earthquake, obviously. We got a new earthquake on our hands called a depression or a recession, and we're doing everything we possibly can to help businesses through this very difficult period.
Okay. Well, from there, I'd like to, since we talked about the recession and the current budget deficit that's in the state and the nation, I guess, Tom, what is the current state of the California budget?
Yeah, you almost want to laugh at that when you hear the question. You're talking about a $40 billion deficit for this year. The recent compromise in the state legislature has closed that to roughly within balance, but just within the last few weeks, the Legislative Analyst Office is now predicting an additional $8 billion. So we're actually looking at really now a $50 billion deficit. And because of the way we finance government in California, if things continue to deteriorate, you're going to be talking about even more of a structural deficit. So yeah, we've got an unprecedented situation on our hands.
Okay, so how is the crisis affecting spending across the state? Like, where are people seeing budget cuts?
Well, I'm not sure the cuts have really hit yet, but
no.
They'll be coming. School districts are now delivering pink slips. County agencies are hiring freeze. The city of Los Angeles is facing a potential $4 billion budget deficit out of I believe, a $7 or $8 billion budget. I mean, that's half of the budget. So the rubber, we have not yet seen the consequences of this economic crisis. It takes a little while to trickle down to government, but when they come, it's potentially very scary.
Well, and I think if I can jump in on Tom's point, part of the frustration that we deal with in the business community or the community at large is looking at how government in general responds to a slowdown in the economy or a cutback. If government were a business, they'd have been bankrupt long ago. If the state of California or the city of Los Angeles operated like a for-profit business, they would have gone under a long time ago because they just don't have the revenue to sustain the operation that they currently have. And the ironic thing is government doesn't follow the typical pattern of what to do in a slowdown. You know, normally a business, if you're operating and your revenues dry up, you start cutting expenses. And unfortunately, the majority of those expenses are on the human side. They're jobs. But one of the ways that business is able to continue providing at least most of those jobs is to lay off some. Government doesn't do that. Government, unfortunately, starts cutting back on programs, which starts to impact those other providers in the state of California, like child care delivery systems, health care delivery systems, the school systems. They're the ones that take the first brunt of those cuts, not that first round of employee cuts that probably should be affected if they were serious about trying to balance the budget. I think I was in Sacramento the 2 days that the last budget debate was going on, when they spent the night and finally came out that morning with a new budget. And it was amazing because everybody was celebrating the fact that they had a balanced budget. Well, it was not a balanced budget. You know, they were still $40 billion upside down. They had simply deferred that obligation they had for what, 3 weeks, 4 weeks? I mean, we're now faced with it all over again.
Well, I guess one of the questions I've always had is, California is one of the top 10 economies in the entire world.
Right.
So how does this come about? How does a budget crisis come about like this in such a large economy? What do you think? It's the way government anticipates revenue and sets their budget. California for years has done what I call advanced budget preparation. They'll look at what their revenues were, base those on projections for the following year, and then set a spending pattern or a spending plan that looks to those new budget projections. When those funds start to dry up, like state sales tax revenue starts to dry up, property taxes start to fall off, and again, the revenue sources aren't what they thought they would be when they based that budget, unfortunately they don't start cutting back on the expenditure side. They keep spending at the same rate that they were, and that's where we end up with these huge deficits. If we would cut back and spend what we had revenue-wise, we wouldn't be in a deficit spending program or deficit budget situation.
You know, I would add to that California's budget is really tied to the economic cycle. And so when the revenues, when the good times are here, California has a lot of money. So, think back to the late 1990s, which now appears as some sort of golden age for California. Right. We were able to close the structural deficit because of the humming .com industry and the capital gains taxes that were being produced. So at that time, and it's a good illustration of the point that Bruce is making, the governor and the legislature have money to throw around, and so they create reforms such as classroom sizes, exactly. Lowering classroom sizes, which I think we can all agree is a good goal. But when the money's not there, you already have the policy of 20 or 25 classroom sizes, and so now you have exactly the kind of. So, it's difficult as a government to be able to anticipate revenue. And then if you make policy changes like a smaller classroom size, it's difficult to take that back. And so, a lot of these choices are quite difficult.
Okay. Well, Bruce, how is the budget crisis affecting the Valley?
What we're hearing, and we don't, as an organization, we don't have any direct contract relationship with the state of California, so we don't see an impact in our operating revenue or our own financial situation. But I'm hearing from small businesses, I'm hearing from medium-sized businesses, people that are operating, as I said, daycare centers, child care centers, private education centers that are contracted with the state of California. Some of these people, their sole source of revenue is a state contract. And when the state decides not to pay their bills or they defer payment on their bills, these people go out of business. I mean, they cannot make their own payroll. They can't keep people employed. So we're, as a region, the Valley's getting impacted the same way most of the other regions in California are. And that's by those companies or those organizations that directly contract with the state of California. When the state revenues aren't there, they don't have that revenue. They can't pay their bills.